the clean dead man. By 1973, Pablo Neruda's monument is already built. A poet, a Nobel laureate, a diplomat, a senator. Then comes the coup. 12 days later, he is dead. The dead man becomes larger than the body in the coffin and begins, almost immediately, to harden into symbol. Pablo Neruda, poet, victim, conscience, nation. The cleaner the symbol, the more suspicious the cleaning. Act 1. The monument. Neruda was, in the simplest possible sense, a major poet, not a minor figure later inflated by politics, not a ceremonial writer mistaken for greatness, but a writer of extraordinary reach and durable scale. He wrote love poems that entered popular culture, political verse that traveled through movements and parties, and public prose capable of presenting the poet as witness, pilgrim, and representative man. His lines did not stay on the page. They moved into schoolrooms, weddings, memorials, slogans, and private grief. In Chile, and far beyond it, Neruda did not circulate merely as one writer among others. He circulated as a national voice. A figure of that size can be taught to children, mourned in public, quoted without qualification, and carried into public life as something larger than literature. Once that arrangement begins to work, it becomes difficult to disturb. Act 2. The mess. Useful myths do not survive by accident. They survive because they answer a need. The problem is not that Neruda was secretly a mediocrity. He was not. The problem is that the monument requires a simpler man than history can supply. Begin with self-construction. Neruda did not merely publish poems. He published Pablo Neruda. He understood scale, ceremony, and posterity. His public voice often arrived already enlarged, already shaped for audience and afterlife. Even before death, he had become very good at becoming Neruda. That is not incidental to his significance, it is part of it. But it means the public figure is never merely discovered. He is composed. That composition includes vanity. It includes the poet not only as artist, but as witness of continents, voice of peoples, and man moving through the century at full size. Some of the moral weight later attached to him does not begin after death. It is prepared in advance by the life itself. Neruda was not a writer with passing opinions. He was a committed communist, a man who tied poetry to political cause, reputation to struggle, and public voice to ideological alignment. That commitment gave his work force. It also gave it blindness. His relation to Stalin belongs to the record. Neruda could excuse, praise, or pass over what should have demanded harder judgment. The moral imagination, visible in some of his poetry, did not reliably produce moral clarity in politics. He was capable of outrage, but also of selectivity, capable of solidarity, but also apology. The public monument prefers resistance without compromise. The documented Neruda does not provide that convenience. And then there is the fracture that refuses all decorative handling. In his memoir, Neruda describes forcing himself on a Tamil woman while serving in Ceylon. The passage has been discussed, minimized, condemned, defended, translated into softer language, and folded into larger arguments about art, context, and historical standards. But the essential point is not difficult to understand. The passage describes sexual violence. It does not become excusable because a famous man committed it. This does not erase the body of work as though history were a balance sheet. It matters for another reason. Memorial innocence depends on subtraction. To keep Neruda polished, something has to go. A national conscience is easier to maintain when inconvenient facts are quietly removed from the room. The contradiction is not accidental to the legend. It is managed by it. Act 3. The Seal. The dictatorship does not create the myth from nothing. The material already exists. What Pinochet provides is moral contrast. On one side, uniforms, prisons, censorship, torture, fear. On the other, the dead poet, now safely voiceless, available for mourning, dignity, and opposition. The record does not improve. The pressure reorganizes attention. Neruda's death, arriving only days after the coup, helps fix that contrast quickly. An ordinary death would already have carried symbolic weight in those conditions. A disputed death carries even more. Rumor enlarges memory. Controversy makes the body harder to bury. His funeral enters the emotional map of dictatorship almost at once. The poet begins to pass from writer into memorial object. Under repression, the dead often do work for the living. They become rallying points, compressed forms of a lost republic, portable versions of national dignity. A figure like Neruda is almost perfect for that function. He is famous enough to unify, literary enough to seem elevated, political enough to matter, and dead enough to stop interfering with his own legend. The opposition needs a figure who can stand clearly against the regime. Institutions need a teachable greatness that can survive public use. Readers need the poet more than they need the man. Under those conditions, criticism begins to look badly timed. Even necessary facts can be treated as contamination, because to mention them is to risk being mistaken for an ally of uglier things. Pinochet does not need to touch Neruda's legend directly. The regime's existence performs the cleaning from the outside. The more monstrous the dictatorship becomes, the more the dead poet begins to glow. That glow is not entirely false. It is also not innocent. It is political hygiene. Epilogue. Pablo Neruda becomes what politically useful dead men often become, a public certainty built over a historical mess. The result is not a false poet, but something more common and more durable, a true monument built out of selective truth. Famous enough to matter, useful enough to carry, clean enough to survive public handling. Until the file is opened again.